The airport was crowded, the usual buzz of people hurrying to gates, rolling suitcases, and chatter filling every corner. Among the crowd, a single dad sat quietly at a small table near the coffee shop, his young daughter by his side. She was drawing pictures in her notebook, humming softly, completely absorbed in her little world. He watched her with a gentle smile, letting her be, sipping on his black coffee. He had gotten used to these moments of calm before the chaos of life reached him again. He was not a man who stood out. His clothes were simple, his hair slightly messy, his face showing lines of sleepless nights and hard work. People passed by without giving him a second glance. That was fine. He liked being unnoticed. Over the years, he had learned that being quiet and careful often kept him and his daughter safe. Across the lounge, the doors opened and a tall woman entered. She moved with a confidence that made heads turn. She was well-dressed, carrying herself like someone important. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, as if she was checking for someone or something. She noticed the long line at the coffee shop, sighed softly, and headed toward the seating area. The single dad noticed her too, though he didn't look at people unnecessarily. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of worry, maybe fear, that caught his attention. Most people would have thought she was just another busy executive, lost in her own world. But he felt a strange pull to observe her carefully as she passed his table. She paused for a moment, looking around the lounge. Her eyes met his, and she gave a small, polite smile. Then she did something unexpected. She moved her hands slowly, subtly, signing something. He froze for a moment, his heart beating faster. The signs were clear. Help me. He has a weapon. For a second, he could not believe it. Who was this woman? And who was the man she was afraid of? He had never met her before. And yet, there was no mistake. She was asking for help, and she had no way of speaking it aloud. He kept his expression calm, not wanting to alarm anyone, not wanting the man she was afraid of to notice. He looked around carefully. The lounge was busy, full of travelers, families, and business people. But he could see the man she had feared. He was standing a few tables away, acting like he belonged, but his eyes kept flicking toward her, sharp and dangerous. The single dad felt a rush of fear, but also a strange sense of focus. He had been in dangerous situations before, though never like this in a public place. He knew he had to act, but he had to be careful. Panic would only make things worse. He nodded slightly to her, using his own hands to sign back slowly. I see. Stay calm. I will help. Her eyes widened slightly in relief. She nodded almost imperceptibly and continued walking as if nothing had happened. They had to act in silence, in plain sight, without anyone noticing. It was risky, but there was no other way. The man she feared moved closer, pretending to check his phone, but keeping a steady gaze on her. He was tall, broad, and intimidating. Anyone else might have been too scared to even look at him, but the single dad kept his eyes on him. He studied the man carefully, noting his posture, his movements, and the way he glanced around. There had to be a way to protect the woman without creating a scene. The little girl looked up at him, sensing his tension. She didn't fully understand, of course, but she could feel the change in the atmosphere. He smiled at her softly, ruffling her hair. It's okay, sweetie. Just keep drawing, he whispered, though his words were mostly for himself. Keeping her calm was important. She should not be afraid. He watched the woman sit down at a small table, pretending to check her phone. Her movements were careful, controlled, but her hands occasionally moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, as she continued to signal for help. He could see the subtle fear in her eyes. She was trusting him entirely, a complete stranger, and that trust weighed heavily on him. He had learned to stay calm under pressure, but even he felt his pulse quicken. One wrong move, and everything could go wrong. The man with the weapon was unpredictable, and there were too many innocent people around to risk a confrontation. He had to think fast. He scanned the area again. There was a trash can nearby, a couple of tables, and a service hallway behind the cafe. If the situation escalated, he would need to move quickly, but for now, the key was keeping the woman safe and keeping the man unaware that she was signaling for help. He took a deep breath and pretended to sip his coffee, letting his eyes casually follow the man's movements. He needed a plan that was simple but effective. Distraction, distance, and careful observation. If he could guide her subtly without attracting attention, they might get out of this without anyone else noticing. The woman looked around again, her eyes meeting his briefly. Another message. He is getting closer. I can't sit here much longer. He nodded slightly, signaling that he understood. She pretended to get up, adjusting her bag, moving toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. He positioned himself between her and the threat, pretending to read something on his phone while subtly guiding her path. The man hesitated for a moment, noticing her movement, but not yet understanding that someone else was paying attention. The single dad felt a surge of determination. He would not let anything happen to her, not here, not in front of innocent people. He caught her attention again with a small gesture. Follow me slowly. She nodded and walked behind him, keeping her composure, trusting him completely. No words were exchanged. They were moving in silence, like shadows in a crowded room, unnoticed, blending in with the flow of travelers' dot. He could feel the tension building with every step. Every glance, every movement had to be precise. He pretended to check the time on his watch, walking her path subtly, guiding her toward a safer exit. The man with the weapon started to show signs of impatience, his eyes narrowing, but he still had no idea what was happening. The single dad's mind raced with possibilities. If the man approached too closely, he might need to create a small commotion, something that looked accidental, but would distract him long enough for the woman to escape. But for now, they had to move carefully, without drawing attention. The woman kept her head down, walking as if she had a purpose, checking her phone occasionally. She trusted him completely, and he could see the relief in her eyes, even under fear. That trust gave him courage, gave him a sense of responsibility that went beyond anything he had ever felt. He noticed a service door nearby, partially hidden behind the pillar. It led to a quiet hallway that was rarely used by the public. If they could reach that, they would have a chance to regroup, to think of the next move. He slowed down, letting the woman pass him, and subtly pointed toward the door. She understood immediately, nodding once. The man with the weapon took a step forward, sensing something, but it was too late. They were already moving toward the service door. The single dad made sure the path looked natural, like nothing unusual was happening. Every movement had to appear normal, casual, part of the everyday chaos of the airport lounge. The little girl noticed nothing, still humming softly, drawing her pictures, completely unaware of the danger that had brushed past them. Her innocence gave him strength. He could not let anything happen to either of them. As they approached the service door, the single dad positioned himself at the side, letting her pass first. He kept one eye on the man, ready to act if necessary, but hoping it would not come to that. They slipped through the door and into the quiet hallway beyond, leaving the crowded lounge behind. The tension did not leave immediately. They were still in a public space, still vulnerable, but for the first time, they had a chance to breathe, to plan the next step. He looked at her, silently asking if she was okay. She gave a small nod, relief washing over her features, but the fear was still there. He realized then how fragile safety could be, how quickly danger could appear in a world full of people who seemed ordinary. And he also realized something else sometimes. The smallest connection, a shared understanding, could make the difference between safety and disaster. For now, They were out of immediate danger, but the night was far from over. The single dad knew that this was only the beginning, that the real challenge was yet to come. But he also knew that he could not fail not when someone's life depended on him. And in that moment, in the quiet of the hallway, with the crowd and chaos behind them, a silent promise was made. No matter what came next, he would protect her. He would keep her safe, using every skill, every bit of knowledge he had. Because in a world that often overlooked the quiet, the ordinary, sometimes the most important acts of courage were unseen, silent, and done without expectation of reward. The hallway was quiet, almost empty, a sharp contrast to the noisy lounge they had just left. The single dad kept a careful pace, making sure the CEO stayed just behind him, her small bag clutched tightly in her hand. The little girl walked beside him, still humming softly, oblivious to the tension in the air. The single dad knew they were not safe yet. The man with the weapon had noticed her movement and could still follow them. They needed a place to regroup, somewhere they could think without being watched. He led them down the narrow hallway, glancing back occasionally. Each time he did, his heart skipped a beat, but the man had not followed yet. That gave him a little hope, enough to keep moving forward. The CEO followed closely, pretending to look at the signs along the walls. Her hands twitched slightly at her sides, almost imperceptibly, and he realized she was still signaling, though more subtly now. She was checking for threats, for anyone who might notice their escape. It was clear she was used to being careful, but she had underestimated how dangerous it could be in a public place. He glanced at her and nodded slightly. "Stay calm. We'll figure this out," he signed. She responded with a small, almost shy nod, grateful that someone had understood without words. For a moment, the fear in her eyes softened, and she allowed herself to trust him fully. They turned a corner, and the hallway widened slightly. There was a small service area with a few locked doors, cleaning supplies, and a narrow stairwell leading to the basement. The single dad assessed the options. The stairwell could give them temporary cover, but it might also trap them if the man followed. The small service room looked safer for the moment. It had a window to the outside and only one way in, which meant they could control who entered. He motioned to the CEO toward the room. She hesitated, but he gave a reassuring nod. "This way," he signed again. She followed silently, slipping into the room with him. The door clicked softly behind them. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. He turned to look at her. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of concern. She shook her head slightly, biting her lip. She had been trained to appear composed in front of others, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. She signed back, "I'm scared." "I didn't think anyone would notice." He nodded, understanding completely. "You're safe for now." "I'll make sure of it," he signed back. She relaxed a little, though not completely. They were still in a vulnerable position, and both knew it. The little girl looked up at him, noticing his seriousness. "Are we in trouble?" she asked softly. He smiled gently, crouching down to her level. "Nothing we can't handle," he said, using his tone to reassure her more than the words. She nodded, trusting him completely, and returned to her drawing. The CEO took a seat on a small bench along the wall, her bag still clutched to her chest. She studied him quietly, trying to understand who he was and why he had helped her so quickly. He looked ordinary, tired, worn, like any other man, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes, a calm confidence that spoke of experience. She had never met anyone like him before. "I don't even know your name," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter right now. We need to focus on getting you out of here safely," he replied. She nodded, realizing that in moments like this, names and introductions were meaningless compared to action and trust. The single dad took a deep breath. thinking about the next step. They couldn't stay here long. If the man became aware of their disappearance, he would start searching. They needed a plan to get her safely out of the building and to a place where she could call for help without being followed. He studied the room, looking for anything useful. There was a janitor's closet with cleaning supplies, brooms, and mops. There was also a window that overlooked a service alley outside. It wasn't an ideal exit, but it could work if they moved carefully. He pointed toward the window, signing, "This could be our way out." Quietly, slowly, the CEO's eyes widened, but she nodded. She understood the risk, but she also knew that he was right. There was no other choice. They would have to trust him completely, and he could see that trust in her eyes. He moved first, gently guiding the little girl to the window. "Stay close and don't make a sound," he whispered. The girl nodded, holding his hand tightly. He helped the CEO next, making sure she didn't stumble. Every movement was deliberate, careful, measured. Once they were at the window, he looked outside. The alley was narrow, but there were no people in sight. A low wall separated it from the street, and with careful planning, they could climb over it and disappear from immediate danger. He turned back to the CEO. "We can do this," he signed. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly, but she trusted him fully. He lifted the little girl first, helping her over the wall gently. She landed softly on the other side, looking up at him with wide eyes. "You're okay," he said softly, holding out his hand to help her climb down safely. Next, he helped the CEO. She hesitated for a moment, but he gave her a reassuring smile. "I've got you," he signed. Slowly, carefully, she climbed over the wall. She landed on the other side, her heart racing, but relief flooding through her. They were out of the immediate danger, at least for now. He climbed down last, keeping his eyes on the entrance to the alley. He could see the man at the end of the hallway, looking confused, realizing that the woman had disappeared. The single dad knew that this was only temporary, but it gave them a chance to move, to think, to plan their next steps. They walked quickly down the alley, keeping to the shadows, blending in with the surroundings. The city was alive with people, but they were careful to stay unnoticed. Every step had to be deliberate, measured, controlled. They couldn't afford to draw attention. Finally, they reached a quiet side street, far enough from the airport to feel a little safer. The single dad stopped, letting them catch their breath. The little girl leaned against him, exhausted but unharmed. The CEO looked around, grateful for the temporary safety, but still tense. She signed softly, "Thank you." He nodded, understanding completely. "We're not out of danger yet, but we're closer than we were," he signed back. She smiled faintly, relief and gratitude mixing with lingering fear. They sat for a moment in silence, each processing what had just happened. The little girl drew quietly, humming softly, while the CEO studied him. She wanted to know more about the man who had saved her, but she knew now was not the time. Right now, they had to stay focused, keep moving, and plan for the next step. The single dad scanned the street, thinking about options. There was a taxi stand a few blocks away, but that could be risky. They needed a place where she could call for help safely. He noticed a small cafe across the street. It was quiet, with a back entrance that led to a small room where people could sit without being noticed. That could work. He pointed toward the cafe, signing, "That way." Quietly, carefully. She nodded, trusting him completely. They moved again, keeping to the shadows, blending in with the city life around them. People passed by, unaware of the danger that had followed them moments ago. As they reached the cafe, he held the door open for them, letting them slip inside quietly. The room was small and dimly lit, with only a few patrons. He guided them to a corner table, out of view from the main entrance. The CEO sat down, still clutching her bag tightly, while the little girl curled up beside him, drawing in her notebook. He leaned back, watching the door carefully. "You'll be safe here for a few minutes," he signed. She nodded, still trembling, but she began to relax slightly. She looked at him with curiosity and gratitude. There was something different about him, ordinary, yet extraordinary in the way he had handled everything. He didn't answer her look. Words were unnecessary. Actions had already spoken louder than anything could. They were not strangers anymore. They had become a team, connected by circumstances none of them could have predicted. For the first time, the CEO allowed herself to breathe, to relax just a little. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. She had been helpless, completely at the mercy of someone she didn't even know, and yet she had been saved by kindness, courage, and quiet intelligence. The single dad sat quietly, watching both of them. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a strange calm. He had done this before, protecting people, making quick decisions under pressure. It was never easy, but it was necessary. And now he had to make the next move carefully, ensuring that they were truly SA. Fan could get help without alerting the man who had been following them. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching out with tension and anticipation. He planned their next steps, thinking about how to get the CEO safely to a secure location. He knew the man with the weapon would not give up easily. But for now, they had a chance, and that was all that mattered. He looked at the CEO and the little girl, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small moment of relief. They were alive, they were safe for now, and together, they had survived the first stage of something dangerous. And in that quiet cafe corner, away from the crowd and chaos, a silent bond was forming, one built on trust, courage, and the understanding that sometimes survival depended on the kindness and bravery of a stranger. They stayed in the quiet corner of the cafe for a while, listening to the low hum of conversation around them. The single dad kept glancing at the door, his mind working quickly, thinking of ways to ensure the CEO could leave safely. He could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The little girl doodled quietly in her notebook, occasionally glancing up at him with trusting eyes. He offered a soft smile, trying to reassure both her and himself. The CEO looked around nervously, still holding her bag tightly. She had calmed slightly since the hallway, but the fear hadn't left completely. She signed softly. "What happens now?" He looked at her and signed back. "We move carefully. Watch. Listen. Trust." She nodded, understanding that silence was their ally. Every word spoken out loud could be dangerous. He had been thinking about the safest route for her, somewhere she could call for real help without being noticed. There was a small back street, not far from the cafe, that led to a side entrance of another building. It was usually empty, used only by delivery trucks. If they could reach it, they could disappear into the city without anyone following them. He rose slowly, motioning for the CEO to follow. She hesitated for a moment, then got up, trusting him completely. The little girl held his hand tightly, walking beside him, oblivious to the danger, but sensing the seriousness in his movements. The walk to the back street was quiet, the single dad keeping them close to the walls, staying in the shadows as much as possible. He glanced behind them several times, but the man with the weapon hadn't appeared. That didn't mean he was safe. The man could be waiting, watching, biding his time. When they reached the back street, it was empty as expected. Delivery trucks were parked along the side, but there was plenty of space for them to move quickly. He scanned the area carefully, then motioned for them to follow him down a narrow passage between two buildings. It led to a small alley, barely wide enough for them to walk single file. They moved slowly but steadily, keeping quiet and alert. The CEO followed closely, her eyes darting around, watching every shadow, every movement. The little girl skipped slightly, still humming, but he kept her close, holding her hand and guiding her along. Suddenly, a noise came from behind them. The single dad froze, listening carefully. A trash can had fallen over somewhere down the street, a loud clang that echoed in the alley. He turned subtly, checking to see if the man had followed them. There was no one there, but he knew better than to let his guard down. Danger could appear at any moment. He led them to a corner of the alley, where they could see the street ahead, but remain partially hidden. He crouched slightly, signaling them to do the same. The CEO knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly. She signed, "Do you think he saw us?" He shook his head slowly and signed back, "Not yet." "Stay quiet." The alley ahead opened into a small parking lot. Delivery trucks were parked there, but it was largely empty. If they could reach the other side, they could find a taxi or a rideshare and leave the area completely. He studied the lot carefully, planning their next move. "Stay close," he whispered to the CEO and the girl. He led them carefully, moving from shadow to shadow, keeping low and steady. The little girl looked up at him, sensing the tension but trusting him completely. He smiled softly at her, giving her a sense of calm, even though his own heart was racing. Halfway through the lot, they heard footsteps behind them. The single dad froze, pressing himself and the little girl against the side of a building. The CEO followed, her eyes wide with fear. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate, heavy. He peeked around the corner and saw the man approaching. He had noticed them. The single dad quickly scanned the area. There were delivery trucks on one side, walls on the other, and an exit to the street not far ahead. He needed to act fast. He motioned for the CEO to follow him, and they moved quickly but quietly toward a truck parked near the exit. The man paused, noticing their movement. He seemed to sense something was wrong, but didn't immediately chase them. The single dad kept moving, leading them behind the truck, using it as cover. He could see the street beyond, just a few steps away from safety. They were almost at the exit when the man moved suddenly, taking a few quick steps toward them. The single dad acted instinctively. He grabbed a small piece of debris from the ground and threw it toward another part of the lot, creating a loud noise. The man turned his head, distracted, and they took the chance to slip past him. They reached the street safely, breathing heavily. The little girl clung to him, exhausted but unharmed. The CEO looked at him with a mixture of relief and admiration. She signed softly, "You saved us." He nodded, signing back, "We're not done yet. We need to find help." He scanned the street and spotted a taxi parked nearby. It looked unoccupied, but he knew they had to be careful. The man with the weapon could still be following. He motioned for them to stay low and moved toward the taxi slowly, checking the street behind them as he went. When he reached the taxi, he opened the door quietly and helped the little girl inside first. She sat down, clutching her notebook, looking up at him with wide eyes. He smiled reassuringly and helped the CEO into the back seat. She closed the door quietly, watching him carefully as he moved to the driver's side. The man had not appeared yet. They were still vulnerable, but at least for the moment, they had a chance to escape. He got into the driver's seat, started the engine quietly, and motioned for the CEO to sit back as far as possible. The little girl leaned against him. Exhausted but trusting Dot, he drove slowly at first, keeping an eye out for any signs of pursuit. The streets were busy with late afternoon traffic, which worked to their advantage. People moving around, cars passing by, it made them less noticeable. He guided the taxi carefully, taking turns that would put buildings between them and anyone who might be following. After a few blocks, the CEO relaxed slightly, still tense but beginning to breathe easier. She signed, "Thank you for helping us. I don't know what would have happened without you." He shook his head, signing back, "We're not safe yet." "Just a little longer." The little girl yawned, leaning against him. "Are we going home now?" she asked softly. He smiled, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Almost," he said. He meant it literally. They were almost to a safe location, somewhere she could call for help and make sure the danger was gone. They turned into a quieter part of the city, away from the main roads. He had a safe place in mind, a friend's building with a secure lobby and a small apartment nearby. It was not far, but it was hidden from the main streets and had good visibility for anyone approaching Dot as they drove. He kept scanning the area, careful and alert. Even though they were in a moving vehicle, he knew danger could strike anywhere. He glanced at the CEO, who looked exhausted but grateful. She trusted him completely now, and he knew that her safety depended entirely on his quick thinking and calmness under pressure. When they reached the building, he parked a short distance away, making sure no one could see them from the street. He opened the doors quietly, helping the little girl out first. She looked up at him, trusting and exhausted, and he smiled softly. Then he helped the CEO, who clutched her bag tightly, but followed without hesitation. They walked quickly to the lobby, the single dad keeping his eyes on the entrances. The building was empty, except for a security guard who nodded at them. He motioned them toward the elevator, and they went up to a small apartment on one of the upper floors. Once inside, the single dad closed the door and locked it carefully. He turned to face them, taking a deep breath. The CEO looked at him, signing softly, "You saved our lives today. How can I ever thank you?" He shook his head, signing back, "You just need to stay safe." "That's enough." The little girl curled up on the couch, exhausted but safe. The CEO sat down, finally letting herself relax a little. She looked at him with respect and gratitude, realizing that the ordinary man in front of her had extraordinary courage, quick thinking, and a calmness under pressure that had saved them all. They were not completely safe yet, but for the first time since the airport, there was a sense of relief in the room. They had survived the immediate danger, escaped without confrontation, and had a chance to plan the next steps carefully. The single dad looked at both of them, knowing that the next phase would require caution, patience, and strategy. But he felt a small sense of satisfaction. So far, he had protected them, guided them, and kept them alive. That was all that mattered. And in that quiet apartment, away from the crowded streets and danger, a bond was forming between them. One built on trust, courage, and the understanding that sometimes the bravest acts were the ones done quietly, without recognition. In complete faith that they were doing the right thing, the apartment was small but safe, a quiet place where the single dad could finally take a moment to think. The CEO sat on the couch, her bag still clutched tightly, staring at the floor. The little girl sat beside the single dad, finishing her drawing, occasionally looking up at him with trusting eyes. He smiled softly at her and gave a gentle nod, letting her know everything was under control for now. He glanced at the CEO. She had been tense since the hallway, but now there was a mix of relief and lingering fear in her eyes. He could see that she was used to being in control, to managing crises in her own way, but this had been different. She had been vulnerable, relying entirely on someone she didn't know. That trust weighed heavily on him. "I need to know everything," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I need to tell someone who can help. The man who is following me. He can't be allowed to do this to anyone else." He nodded, understanding completely. She had every right to protect herself, and now it was time to make a plan to do that. He asked her to sit quietly while he surveyed the apartment. There was a small table by the window, a few chairs, and a door leading to a small balcony. It was enough space for them to regroup and plan, and he felt confident that no one outside could see them easily. He motioned to the CEO, signing, "We need to call someone." Quietly, carefully, she nodded, reaching into her bag and pulling out her phone. She typed quickly, sending messages to trusted colleagues and security teams, careful not to speak aloud. Every movement was deliberate, precise. The single dad watched her, impressed by her composure under pressure. Even as her hands shook slightly, the little girl looked up at him. "Are they coming to help?" she asked softly. He smiled, crouching down to her level. "Yes, they will," he said gently. "But we need to be patient. Help is on the way." She nodded, trusting him completely, and returned to her drawing. While they waited, he thought about the man with the weapon. Whoever he was, he had been patient, dangerous, and clearly had planned carefully. But there had been a flaw. He had underestimated their quick thinking, their ability to remain calm under pressure. The single dad knew that this man would not stop easily, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. The CEO glanced at him, signing again, "Why did you help me?" "You didn't know me." He shook his head, signing back, "I don't need to know you." "You needed help, and I could give it. That's enough." She looked at him, surprised by his calmness, by the quiet confidence in his eyes. She had met many people in her life, but few had shown this level of courage without hesitation. Minutes passed slowly. The single dad kept scanning the streets below through the window, making sure no one suspicious approached the building. He felt a strange mixture of relief and tension. Relief that they were safe for now, and tension because the threat was still out there. The man might have been following them even now, waiting for an opportunity. The CEO finished sending her messages and looked at him. She signed softly, "They will come soon, but we can't leave it to them entirely. We need to think of every possibility." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They had to be prepared for any situation, any surprise. He walked over to the balcony door and opened it slightly, peering outside. The streets below were busy, but no one seemed suspicious. Delivery trucks, cars, people walking ordinary life continued, unaware of the danger that had passed just moments ago. He closed the door and turned to the CEO. "We need a plan for when help arrives," he signed. "We can't be caught off guard. If the man shows up again, we need to be ready." She nodded, understanding. She had been trained for crisis management, but now she realized that the calm, quick thinking of a stranger could be more valuable than all her experience. They spent the next few minutes discussing quietly, using signs to communicate. Every word, every gesture was deliberate. They went over escape routes, potential hiding spots, and what to do if the man appeared again. The single dad felt a sense of focus, a clarity that came only when lives were at stake. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. Both of them froze. The single dad motioned for the CEO to stay back. He approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. Outside was a uniformed security officer, waving politely. He sighed quietly, relieved. Help had arrived. He opened the door slightly, letting the officer in. "We received your messages," the officer said softly. "Everything's okay now?" The single dad nodded, signaling the CEO to speak. She quickly explained the situation, signing to him the key details. The officer listened carefully, taking notes and nodding. The little girl watched them with curiosity, sensing the seriousness, but trusting the adults around her. The officer smiled at her gently, trying to reassure her. She smiled back faintly, comforted by the kindness. Once the initial briefing was done, the single dad turned to the CEO. "You should be safe now," he signed. She looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she signed. He shook his head, signing back, "Just stay safe." "That's enough." The officer confirmed that the man with the weapon had been identified and would be apprehended shortly. They would remain nearby until the situation was fully resolved. The CEO finally relaxed, leaning back against the couch, exhaustion and relief washing over her. The little girl yawned, curling up beside the single dad. "Can we go home now?" she asked softly. He smiled, gently ruffling her hair. "Soon," he said. "We're almost done." The CEO studied him quietly for a moment, signing, "Who are you?" He smiled faintly, signing back, "Just someone who tries to help when I can." She nodded, a mix of admiration and respect in her eyes. She had never met someone like him before, ordinary, yet extraordinary in the way he had handled danger. The single dad sat quietly, watching them both. He felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had protected them, guided them, and kept them alive. It was never easy, but it was necessary. And now they could begin to think about the next steps, about moving forward safely. The officer confirmed that backup would arrive soon, and they would escort the CEO to a secure location. The single dad nodded, satisfied that everything was in place. He had done what he could, and now it was time for the professionals to take over. As they waited, the CEO signed softly, "You are amazing. You saved my life, and my daughter's life too. I will never forget this." He shook his head, smiling faintly. "You just need to stay safe." "That's enough," he signed back. The little girl looked up at him again, her eyes wide. "Will everything be okay now?" she asked softly. He nodded, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Yes, everything will be okay," he said. The officer returned a few minutes later, confirming that the situation outside was under control. They would take the CEO to a secure location, and the man who had threatened her would be apprehended. She signed softly to the single dad, "Thank you for everything." He nodded, signing back, "Stay safe." As they prepared to leave, the CEO gave him a small, grateful smile. She had been through a frightening ordeal, and yet here was someone who had saved her without hesitation, without seeking recognition. She realized that courage and kindness could come from the most unexpected places. The little girl held his hand one last time before they left, looking up at him with trust and admiration. He smiled, feeling a quiet sense of pride. They had survived together, and now it was time to let others take over. The officer led the CEO out of the apartment safely, and the single dad watched them go, feeling a sense of calm. The immediate danger was over, and he had done his part. He turned back to the little girl, who was smiling faintly, and held her hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go home." They left the apartment quietly, walking back into the streets. The city was alive, full of people moving about their day, unaware of the danger that had passed just moments ago. But for them, life had changed. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and had survived because of trust, courage, and quick thinking. As they walked, he reflected on the events of the day. It had been ordinary at first, just another trip, another moment in the city, but it had turned extraordinary. They had been tested, and they had come through together. The CEO had learned the value of trusting others, and he had been reminded that courage could take many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes invisible, but always powerful. The little girl skipped beside him, humming softly, still innocent, still trusting. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of responsibility and hope. They were safe now, at least for the moment, and that was all that mattered. And as they disappeared into the busy streets, the bond between them, silent yet strong, remained. One built on trust, courage, and the understanding that sometimes the smallest actions of a stranger could change lives in ways that would never be forgotten. After the CEO was safely escorted away by the security team, the single dad finally allowed himself to breathe. The little girl held his hand tightly, still quiet but now calm. The city streets seemed almost ordinary again, the noise of traffic and pedestrians blending into a normal rhythm. But he knew that nothing about today had been ordinary. He walked beside his daughter, keeping her close, thinking about how quickly life could change. One moment, you were sipping coffee in a crowded lounge, and the next, you were helping a stranger escape from danger. He had never imagined he would be thrust into such a situation, yet now he had done it and survived. The thought left him with a mix of exhaustion, relief, and a quiet sense of pride. The little girl glanced up at him. "Are we going home now?" she asked softly, still clutching her notebook. He smiled, bending down to her level. "Yes, sweetie." "Home," he said gently. He could see the trust in her eyes, the way she relied on him completely. Protecting her had always been his first priority, but today he had protected someone else too. It was strange, but he felt it had made him stronger, more certain of his own abilities. They turned a corner and entered the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The little girl's pace quickened as she spotted the small apartment building where they lived. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, safe and quiet. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, letting the little girl slip ahead. She ran to her room, still humming softly, as if nothing had happened. He chuckled quietly, shaking his head at her innocence and resilience. Once inside, he took a deep breath and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. The adrenaline from the day was still coursing through him, his heart pounding, but he felt an odd sense of calm. They had survived, they had helped someone, and they had done it quietly, without anyone even noticing. That was enough. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, the quiet of the apartment settling around him. He sat down at the table, thinking about the events of the day. The CEO, a powerful and important woman, had trusted him completely, relying on his instincts and quick thinking. He had never asked for thanks or recognition, and yet he had made a difference. That thought stayed with him, quietly affirming something he had always known, that courage did not need an audience. And doing the right thing often meant acting without expectation of reward. After a few moments, there was a soft knock at the door. He opened it cautiously to find the CEO standing there, a small envelope in her hand and a warm, grateful smile on her face. She had come back, not with security, but alone, trusting him again. He was surprised, but nodded for her to enter. "Thank you," she said softly, placing the envelope on the table. "I know words can't really express it, but I want you to have this." He shook his head, starting to protest, but she held up her hand. "No arguments. You saved lives today. That's enough. But I hope this helps a little." He looked at her, seeing sincerity in her eyes. She had been through something terrifying, and yet here she was, coming back to show gratitude. He accepted the envelope quietly, feeling a mixture of humility and surprise. The little girl peeked around the corner of the living room. "Who's that?" she asked softly. He smiled and waved her over. "Someone we helped," he said gently. The little girl's eyes widened slightly as she studied the CEO, sensing the connection between them without fully understanding it. The CEO knelt slightly to the girl's level. "You were very brave too," she said softly. The little girl smiled faintly, a shy but proud smile. It was a small moment, but it felt important, bridging the gap between their worlds. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, the CEO signed softly to him. "I want to make sure you and your daughter are safe, now and in the future." He nodded slowly, understanding her intentions. She wasn't offering pity or charity. She was offering stability, an opportunity to make their lives better. She explained, still using quiet words and gestures. that she wanted to help him find better work opportunities, to ensure that he and his daughter could have a more secure life. It was not a handout, but a chance to move forward, to step into something new. He listened carefully, considering the offer. It was unexpected, and yet he realized it could change everything for them. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. Life had been difficult, filled with challenges and uncertainty, but today had proven something important. He could face danger, protect those he loved, and help others, even strangers. And now, there was a possibility to build a better future. The CEO noticed the pause in his thoughts. She signed again, softly, "You don't have to answer right now. Just think about it." He nodded, appreciating the patience and respect she showed. She understood that decisions about the future could not be rushed, especially when trust had to be earned. As she prepared to leave, the little girl ran over to her and hugged her briefly, a small gesture of connection that left both adults smiling. The CEO hugged her back gently and whispered, "Be safe." The little girl nodded, then ran back to her father, still smiling faintly. The CEO left quietly, giving them space to process everything that had happened. Once the door closed, the single dad sat down, taking a deep breath. The apartment was quiet again, but it felt different now. The events of the day, the trust and courage shown, had left a lasting impression. He realized that even ordinary people could do extraordinary things when it mattered most. The little girl climbed onto the couch beside him. "Daddy," she said softly, "you were like a hero today." He chuckled quietly, ruffling her hair. "Maybe," he said gently, "but it was also because we had to stay calm and think carefully." She nodded, clearly proud, and leaned against him, feeling safe and loved. That night, after putting the little girl to bed, he sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on everything. The CEO's gratitude, the danger they had faced, the small victories along the way, it all came together in a strange mix of relief, humility, and hope. He realized that courage was not about showing off or being recognized. It was about acting when it mattered, protecting those who needed help, and trusting yourself to make the right choices under pressure. He thought about the CEO's offer, understanding its potential. It could mean stability, opportunity, and a brighter future for both him and his daughter. He didn't feel entitled to it, and yet he recognized that this was a rare chance to step forward, to move from survival to possibility. The next morning, the city felt different. Ordinary life had resumed, but he saw it with new eyes. Every person he passed seemed to carry their own stories, their own fears and courage. He walked to the local park with his daughter, letting her run and play freely while he watched, quietly reflecting. He realized that the small acts of bravery, the quiet decisions made under pressure, had ripple effects beyond what anyone could see. When they returned home, there was a message waiting from the CEO. She wanted to meet again, to discuss the opportunities she had mentioned. He read it carefully, feeling a mix of anticipation and cautious optimism. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a future that was safer, brighter, and filled with possibility for both him and his daughter. He thought about how ordinary life could change in an instant. A simple trip to the airport had turned into a life-altering experience. It had tested his courage, his quick thinking, and his ability to protect those he cared about. And it had reminded him of something fundamental. Kindness and bravery could come from anyone, even someone unnoticed in a crowd. Over the next few days, the single dad began to consider the offer more seriously. He realized that accepting it would not just help him and his daughter. It would honor the trust and bravery that had been shown that day. It was a way to take the extraordinary experience and turn it into something lasting, something meaningful. As he sat with his daughter one evening, helping her with her homework, He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Life was still challenging, but it was also filled with opportunities. And he understood now more than ever that courage was quiet, bravery was often invisible, and the smallest acts of trust and kindness could change lives forever. And in the quiet of their home, he made a silent promise to himself to protect his daughter, to act with courage when it mattered, and to never underestimate the power of doing the right thing. Even when no one else could see it, the city outside continued its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet heroism that had played out in its streets. But for the single dad and his daughter, and for the CEO whose life had been saved, the events of that day would never be forgotten. It was a story of courage, trust, and humanity, a reminder that sometimes ordinary people could do extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. And as the sun set over the city, they all moved forward, changed by the events, stronger for the experience, and quietly connected by the trust and bravery that had carried them through a day that no one could have predicted.